first, obviously, UFC 242 is this weekend on Saturday. Anthony, thoughts on the main event? Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Dustin Poirier. I'm of the mindset that this fight is far closer than people think, that Dustin Poirier has a legit chance of pulling off the upset, that his blend of striking ability, overall grappling ability might give Khabib a lot of issues. When going back and watching fights as of late for this fight, Khabib struggles. We portray him as this dominant force throughout this division, and there's been numerous fights where people did have success in rounds. Hell, even the Conor McGregor fight in last October was far more competitive in that third and even the beginning of the fourth round than I think people remember. But a lot to dissect with this fight. So, Ant, your thoughts on the main event in terms of in the cage sort of stylistic matchup?
As far as the X's and O's go, I think you're right on because this is, like, for the record, I'm favoring Khabib to win this fight, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be a steamrolling as we're used to. Like, I don't think it's going to resemble anything like the Edson Barboza fight or even the Conor fight, which, Conor did win that third round in my opinion, but overall he got dominated. So I don't see it happening that way because Poirier poses a lot of problems. One, he hits very hard, as Max Holloway can attest to. He's a very, very strong guy at 155. He also has the tendency of throwing a lot of uppercuts and knees as well, and that's kind of the kryptonite for guys who like to shoot in for that straight takedown attempt. So there are a lot of things that Dustin can do in this fight, and also he has the right mindset coming into it. I believe, like Poirier has kind of perpetually been the underdog in a lot of cases and has risen to the occasion many times. I think this is. I think no matter what happens, I think Poirier will make a very good showing for himself.
Agreed. And on top of that, Luke Thomas did a fantastic breakdown of the takedown defense of Dustin Poirier, adding how a lot of his takedown defense is predicated off of his grappling, that he basically uses guillotines and certain arm locks, certain kimuras as a way to defend takedowns, and then uses that for transition scrambles to basically have control of the grappling exchange. And I am curious to see that dynamic with Khabib, because Khabib is a chain wrestler. He's a guy that isn't really going to get you with the first takedown attempt. Naturally, Khabib actually is a guy that can't take you down in space. If you're in the middle of the cage, you actually have a lot of advantages to keep the fight standing. Conor was able to do that in the third round, for example, right?
Right. Even look at the first round. The very first takedown in that fight, had Conor not re-engaged on in the grappling, when that initial shot, he stuffed it and looked like he got his hips away, and then he decided to try to take his back, and that's all that Khabib needed to grab a limb and then hold on for dear life and kind of reestablish the chain wrestling.
Interesting. Also, apart from that breakdown from Luke Thomas, is that Dustin Poirier in his lightweight run, he's only lost one time against Michael Johnson with I'm not gonna say a fluke knockout, but that was a one punch knockout, sort of in the first round. The rest of his lightweight run, he's won every single fight except for the no contest, obviously in the first Eddie Alvarez fight. But most of those fighters, I would say, aren't really wrestlers, right? Like even Eddie Alvarez, in the most part, isn't the dominant wrestler like Khabib is. Justin Gaethje, while a decent wrestler, isn't really the wrestler like Khabib is.
Yeah, he doesn't use it as much as Khabib. Like, thing is, but having a wrestler like Khabib, though, is just not many of them. And usually if there is someone who resembles him style wise, their last name is probably Magomed or something like unless you're one of those Dagestani fighters he's connected to, essentially, you don't have a grappler like Khabib Nurmagomedov in the lightweight division. Like, it just doesn't happen. He's a very difficult guy to prepare for.
Absolutely. And I think while Dustin has perhaps the arsenal and the toolbox to actually beat Khabib, it's that factor alone that, yes, he's only been taken down 3 times in his lightweight run in the UFC, but hasn't really faced a wrestler at all. While Khabib has faced probably one of the best variances of resumes in the lightweight division that you can look at. From guys like Gleason Tebow, Pat Healy, to Hatfield DeSanjos, to Michael Johnson, who obviously beat
To
Dustin
Barboza,
Barboza, Conor McGregor, Al Iaquinta. He has faced really everyone in every shade of fighting in the division. Dustin really hasn't yet. And that, I think, is going to be the big hang-up for me picking him. Though I am really close to picking the upset in Dustin Poirier because I can see him defending the takedown. And then if it's a stand-up battle, he can win that rather easily, in my opinion. And on top of that, if this is just a pure scramble battle, if Khabib really can't be dominant with his positioning on the ground, and there's a lot of scrambles in this game, I could see Dustin getting maybe a submission off of the blue. I can see him pulling something out of his pocket that we don't see because Dustin is that good. But Khabib, just from the experience factor in this division, from facing everyone that you could face, I have to pick Khabib in here. Like he's the safe pick in this fight, even though the upset's live.
Like really, at this point, if you're not picking Khabib Nurmagomedov to win a fight, you probably haven't been paying attention to him. Because it's at a point now. The man's 27-0, so when you're picking against him, you're really trying to buck a trend, a very well established trend at this point, man. It just really doesn't make sense to pick against him right now. As far as some of the style issues are concerned, like you brought up Luke Thomas's breakdown as far as Dustin using submission attempts as ways to sweep and stand back up and whatnot. That is an interesting element that I'd like to see tested against Khabib. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember anybody being able to do that, or at least attempting to do that with any consistency against Nurmagomedov in the past.
No, and I think that's mainly due to Khabib being far too strong.
Right.
Like his wrist control is far too just literally strong in the ground game.
It's suffocating and it's relentless. It's kind of like I think he has a way of establishing his presence to the point where it puts you in a state of panic. And when you're in that state of panic, it's more about just I got to get out of this situation and not thinking, how do I get out of this situation? So you see a lot of guys not going for that Kimura to try to use it to get enough space for their hips to scoot out the other side, or say a guillotine attempt to just threaten that so he doesn't fully commit to the takedown. So I mean, you don't see that because it's like when he gets you in a bad position, it's so overwhelming and it's so demoralizing that it's a desperation to get up. That a guy will lay there and allow himself to get battered and get dominated in position and try to save that little bit of energy to just do one burst, and maybe they can pop up out of it and start back on the feet. And I think like the Edson Barboza fight is probably the best example of that, where like no matter what he tried, it was like he posts with one arm and he's attempting to get up. And Khabib would stop punching him in the face and then snatch that wrist away and then start punching the face again. He puts that hand back and it's just this rinse and repeat. It's just this continual cycle of dominance. But to have someone countering with instead of positional moves, trying to counter with something that can result in their own offense, sounds like at least a different strategy. It's a different approach, and I'd like to see what it looks like.
And also, I will add, it's hard to tell because in the last fight we saw Dustin, his strength was a main factor in him winning, right? Is the fact that he was able to outmuscle Max Holloway. Is he now a stronger fighter than previously thought, and maybe he can at least not maybe match Khabib in the strength factor, but at least be able to contend there and be able to compete there? In pure just positioning control on the ground. But beside the point, I think it's a fantastic fight, and I'm insanely curious to see how this style matchup leads to any holes in Khabib's game that we didn't see was there, like the grappling aspect that we just mentioned, because the next guy up for this fight, or for the winner of this fight, is Tony Ferguson. So if anyone could be unorthodox when it comes to takedown defense and be successful at it, if it's not Dustin Poirier in this division, it's probably Tony Ferguson.
Right.
So I'm curious to see, because I do think Dustin's going to be a good barometer for what a Tony Ferguson Khabib fight looks like. Dustin now switches a lot in his stance when he hits a lot and when he throws combinations. When I was watching back the Max Holloway fight, he would switch combination 3 or 4 times mid combination.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe he did that. Like he outdid what Max Holloway likes to do. Like Dustin Poirier is on a different level than what we previously thought. So I am so close to picking the upset here, but Khabib by decision, probably 48-47 is the safe pick in which I'm going for. Any last thoughts on this main event?
Yeah, I did want to say too, like Holloway has a smoothness to his technique that is interesting to watch, and I think he's Poirier, excuse me. I think he has a particular balance with a lot of his skills that should be an interesting thing to watch match up against Khabib. So, for instance, like Conor is such a precision striker. He relies on that one laser pinpoint shot to do damage. And that's not exactly going to be the right approach against someone like Khabib, who's continually in your face and constantly giving you pressure. Then you look at someone like Barboza, who almost has to be coming forward or at least standing still in order to get the full strength into his kicks and utilize his full athleticism. Once again, that sort of pressure, it just doesn't work that way. Dustin, though, he's able to kind of blend in and adapt and let himself get sloppy and let himself do things that aren't exactly right, but it still works for him. Like I watched some other breakdown of him. I want to say it was one of Dan Hardy's breakdowns, and he's saying how he will sometimes go into a completely square stance and be throwing uppercuts from there, and that is technically wrong to do, but when you're in the heat of battle with someone like Khabib, who was consistently in your face and always on you and stuck on you like glue the whole time, you can't always go by the textbook. The textbook will do you wrong in some of those cases, and you need a guy who's going to be fearless enough to go ahead and try something and let loose. Now, the only person in that lightweight division that I think is more capable of just letting loose and just letting things fly and just seeing what happens is Tony Ferguson. So this is kind of like this is sort of like like you said, a precursor to what Ferguson can be able to do. So I think if Dustin goes out there, wins a couple of rounds, and or at the very least shows himself to consistently be able to put some damage on Khabib in certain positions in certain situations, I think we'll start seeing a chink in the armor. We'll start seeing a little crack of light in there.
I agree completely. Co-main event, speaking of Edson Barboza earlier in terms of Khabib, former opponents, Edson Barboza versus Paul Felder in a rematch. And your thoughts on this fight? I mean, one that I don't think really anyone asked for, and also I think is really high in terms of card placement on a pay-per-view. But hey, it's a card in Abu Dhabi, and we're not gonna get the deepest card, I feel like. Thoughts on the co-main event? Do you think Barboza wins it? Do you think Felder, in this sort of renaissance of his career, is able to win the rematch? Thoughts on the matchup?
It's interesting because this is a fight that I didn't want to see necessarily, but now that it's booked, I'm like, I'm into it.
It's a fun fight. Don't get me wrong. Definitely a fun fight.
The first fight of theirs was a very good fight. It was a very entertaining fight. And I think since then, Paul Felder has gotten a lot better. I think his time as an analyst has improved him as a fighter. So let me just do a quick look at his record. And since he became a commentator and analyst, it's just a certain uptick in his fight IQ, certain things that he just does better now. So since the Barboza fight, he lost that split decision to Ross Pearson, pretty controversial one at that. And since then, he has largely won most of his fights except for a split decision loss to Mike Perry, and that was a fight at welterweight in which he broke his arm, I think, in the second round or something. So take that for what it's worth. And then a loss to Francisco Trinaldo due to a cut. Outside of that, Paul Felder has done a lot of good things, man.
And also, Trinaldo is one of those guys that's highly underrated. I'll add that point.
Exactly. Yeah, no shame in losing to a guy like Trinaldo. And I think Paul Felder has consistently been at the doorstep of the elite at 155. This fight might be able to put him over. I think we've seen enough improvement in Felder and maybe some decline in Barboza to where I think the gap might be closed. But initially, I thought Barboza won that fight because he was the better athlete. He was able to be just a little bit faster. He was able to with technique wise, I think they're skill wise, I think they're kind of neck and neck, at least in the striking department. But Barboza was just a little bit faster. Just reflexes were just a little bit better. And just that little bit started widening the gap as the fight went on. I think that gap is closing a lot now. And I'm going to soft pick for Felder on this one.
I probably agree with you on all points. The only other fight that it really speaks to me in this card is the Duran Calderwood Andrea Lee fight. I love that fight in the women's flyweight division. And the rest of the card's filled with Khabib's stablemates, I feel like, right? The guys that also faced the suspension from the Vegas incident with Conor McGregor, right? Like that. Looking on this list, it's all the same guys.
Never fight in the UFC again.
It's all the guys. Like Zabraya Tukugov, like that was one of the guys. Islam Makhachev was one of the guys. Maribek Tusimov was one of the guys. Who else? There's I think Muzan Salikov was one of the guys. All of these guys were Khabib's crew, man. So I'd really, this card's whatever to me. I love the main event. I think the main event is perhaps one of the best fights of the year. Definitely has the potential to be fight of the year as well, because I think this fight's going to be largely contested with scrambles and on the feet. And we're going to see, one point we haven't mentioned is that Khabib's boxing has been improving with each fight, and having knocked down Conor McGregor, and honestly just boxing better with Conor McGregor than previous fights. I am curious to see the improvement of Khabib's boxing with Dustin Poirier, because that is somebody who you have to have good boxing to really throw combinations with. But the rest of the card, and any sort of highlight that you want to make note of?
The Curtis Blades and Shamil Aber. Guy.
That guy.
Yeah, that guy. That fight should be an interesting one to watch. I mean, Curtis Blades has the misfortune of fighting Francis Ngannou twice.
So close.
But in a world without Francis Ngannou, you're talking about the clear-cut number one contender in Curtis Blades, and I think a guy that we'd be a lot more excited about. So I'm interested to see that. It's also notable that is the only fight that isn't a lightweight fight that is on the main card. Every other main card fight is contested at 155 pounds. So let's just keep in mind here, this fight is in Abu Dhabi. Yes. And just like the fight over the weekend, the Zhang Weili versus Jessica Andrade fight, it is essentially a regional card that is put together for larger business interests.
Or government interest. I'll add that.
Right. This is the UFC signed something with the Abu Dhabi government about bringing a certain amount of fights over to that land. They have a Muslim champion who, let's not forget this, after he beat Conor McGregor at UFC 229, went on a literal world tour where he was hosted by dignitaries and politicians and all sorts of who's who in the influential Muslim world he was courted by. So this guy is a star in that world. He's got, he had adoring fans lined up for blocks to take pictures and sign autographs with him, much more than you would see with crowds in the U.S. if Khabib Nurmagomedov were to just be at your local GNC signing autographs. So this reaches a different level of stardom that he has, and they're using him along with the long list of Muslim fighters to speak to this audience, to get eyeballs on this and impress the people involved with this new partnership.
I will add, Karim Zidane put out a fantastic piece on sports washing by Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries, I think, on The Guardian. I want to say like yesterday or the day before. Check that piece out if you haven't yet. Kareem is one of the best writers, one of the best geopolitical writers in combat sports, if not the best. I think he is probably. Who else really contends with that? But yes, Khabib's world tour of people in the chat saying and warlords and dictators.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes, yes. But yes, definitely. I think that the courting of that audience, and on top of that, the oligarchs involved with that audience is definitely the goal here with this event. Similar, it was an attempt that they did back in 2000.
2010, the Anderson Silva and Damian Maya card. Yeah,
God,
that was the same thing. They put on a big show. It was just when they signed the Flash Entertainment deal, and they had bought 10% of the company, and that was to show off. Then they put the best names that they could that were healthy and ready to go for that card. And this is a similar sort of thing, except you just don't have access to every big name because you've got too many cards now. So you got to do what you got to do. So plan B, get a whole bunch of fighters that speak to that region.
Agree. Moving on, unless you have anything else to say about UFC 242. Actually, one last thing. Pay-per-view sales, because somebody asked us that in the chat. With the new current paradigm of everything on ESPN Plus for pay-per-views, I mean, everything is significantly lowered. If Khabib was fighting Dustin Poirier on terrestrial TV, I think this would be 1 million buys, because I think Khabib is. I think Khabib is now that level of a star.
I wouldn't go. I wouldn't go 1 million.
Look,
I give it like 750.
I think anytime someone does over 2 million, they have such a gigantic long-term star effect. You know, when you hit that number of 2-point-something million buys, you're reaching an era that only like 4 people have hit in their lifetime. Khabib is now one of those, like now 5 or 6 people that have hit that number. He is a significant sporting star. Like when I talk about combat sports with casual fans that are like my friends, that are like truly casuals, right? Khabib is definitely someone they talk about, they mention, they know about this fight, they've asked me about this fight, they've definitely asked me if I'm going to Abu Dhabi. I'm like, joke's on you.
That's
funny.
Hilarious.
Where's the budget for that? But this is on their radar. However, though, because the ESPN Plus paradigm now that all pay-per-views are on that platform, it's not going to break 500,000 buys, but
probably not even in the neighborhood of that.
But something to make note of is that subscriber base for ESPN Plus has been rising significantly. I think it's now well over 2 million. So I think a large part of that is UFC fans. I wouldn't be surprised if they hit a healthy number that we would be shocked by. But if it does 200,000 to 400,000 buys, that's probably far more likely and realistic, just because of the new model, the new paradigm of all pay-per-views on ESPN Plus in the U.S.
Yeah, I just think that the UFC is kind of exhausting the patience for a pay-per-view at this point. To have a paywall behind a paywall is
so stupid.
Yeah, it's just something that just really irritating for a lot of people. Yeah, like if this was something that was available just to order the pay-per-view on ESPN Plus, you didn't have to subscribe to the service, then I think we're talking. Now we actually can start breaking into some of those bigger numbers. But and I also think a lot of the territories that would be willing to pay to see this fight are going to get it for free just because of the countries that they're in. That this would be showing on a free channel on regular TV packages. So,
This fight's going to be massive. Like, regardless of the pay-per-view number, it's Khabib, and Khabib is now a star. Whether or not he is Mayweather or a exactly Conor McGregor level star, I think it's beside the point. He is absolutely one of the top 3 or 4 biggest stars in MMA right now. And
easily.
If you want to expand to combat sports, he's easily in the top 10, without a doubt. If you have the Canelos, the Joshuas, the Mayweathers, you add all of those in the space. Absolutely, he's in the top 10. And again, he might be in the top 5. He might break that. Like, if we're having an argument about who's a bigger star, him or Nate Diaz, like...
That's a bigger star where? is kind of where the follow-up question is going to be for me on that.
And then like maybe like nowadays in a post Khabib Conor world, is Khabib bigger than John Jones? Like that's a legitimate question to be had, and I don't think it's a far-fetched one. But moving on, let's go out to the breaking news of the MMA world. Unless you have anything else to add, sorry, about UFC 242.
No, I think we ran this one to the ground. It's all good.
Matt, if it was funded by someone else, would you go to Abu Dhabi to cover it, or are you still against them? Yeah, I'm definitely not. I wouldn't be down to go. I'll be honest. Same with like Ruiz Joshua. Like if somebody wanted to pay me to go to that, I'm like, I'm good. Like just give me the money to do other stuff, please.
Yeah,
I'd rather not go to those countries. Moving on.